This story is inspired by real-life situations and includes fictional elements for entertainment. Not recommended for viewers under 18.
Some marriages end with screaming, broken dishes, and slammed doors. Michael Carter's marriage ended with a sentence so simple it sounded harmless. He's just a friend. At the time, he believed her. Looking back, he would later realize something terrifying. Most marriages don't collapse in a single moment. They collapse slowly, one lie at a time. Seattle in early autumn carried a strange quiet beauty. The sky was pale gray, the kind that seemed permanently suspended above the city, and the air smelled faintly of rain drifting in from the Puget Sound. Inside the modest two-story house in Bellevue, Michael Carter stood at the kitchen counter, pouring coffee into a mug he had owned for nearly a decade. The mug read, "Words OK as Programmer." Emily had given it to him during their second year of marriage. He remembered laughing when he opened it. Back then, their laughter had been easy. Now it arrived less often. Upstairs, the shower turned off. Michael glanced at the clock on the microwave. 7:18 a.m. Emily was running late again. Their mornings had once been synchronized. Coffee together, a quick breakfast, sometimes a short walk before work. But over the past few months, their schedules had slowly drifted apart, like two boats untied from the same dock. Emily walked into the kitchen, wrapped in a white towel, her hair damp and falling loosely around her shoulders. "Morning," she said, grabbing a yogurt from the fridge. Michael smiled faintly. "Morning." She leaned against the counter, scrolling through her phone, while spooning yogurt into her mouth. Michael noticed the small smile that appeared briefly on her face. "Good news?" he asked. Emily glanced up. "Oh, just a message." "From work?" "Yeah, sort of." She locked the screen and slipped the phone into her pocket. Michael didn't think much of it, at least not yet. Emily worked as a freelance marketing consultant. Her projects came and went unpredictably, sometimes quiet weeks, followed by bursts of chaotic deadlines. Michael had grown used to it. His own job as a senior developer at a growing tech company kept him busy enough that he rarely questioned her schedule. That morning, they ate breakfast mostly in silence. Not an uncomfortable silence, just routine. Emily suddenly spoke. "Hey, I forgot to tell you something." Michael looked up. "What's that?" "I met someone interesting yesterday during a shoot." Michael raised an eyebrow. "A client?" "Not exactly. A photographer who was working on the same campaign." She shrugged casually. "His name's Ryan." Michael nodded. "Cool." Emily smiled. "He's really talented. We ended up talking for like 2 hours about creative projects." Michael sipped his coffee. "That's good. Networking helps." Emily seemed pleased with the answer. For a moment she looked as if she wanted to say more, but instead she checked the time and hurried upstairs to finish getting ready. Michael rinsed his mug and loaded the dishwasher. Ryan. The name drifted through his mind briefly before disappearing. 2 weeks later, the name came up again. They were sitting on the couch watching Netflix when Emily suddenly laughed at a message on her phone. Michael glanced over. "What's funny?" Emily tilted the screen away slightly. "Ryan just sent me a photo from a shoot we did." "Oh yeah? He's trying to get into editorial photography." Michael nodded. "That's pretty competitive." Emily looked excited. "He has this creative energy, like he sees things differently." Michael smiled politely. "That's good." Emily looked at him carefully. "You're not jealous, are you?" Michael blinked. "Of a photographer?" She laughed. "I'm kidding." But something about the question lingered in the air for a moment before dissolving. A few days later, Emily came home later than usual. Michael was in the kitchen, reheating leftovers, when she walked in. "Hey," she said breathlessly. "Long day?" "Yeah, meeting ran over." Michael handed her a plate. "What kind of meeting?" Emily sat down. "Ryan introduced me to a potential client." Michael paused for half a second. "Oh. He shoots their brand campaigns." She took a bite of pasta. "He's actually helping me expand my portfolio." Michael nodded slowly. "That's great." Emily studied him again. "You're quiet." "Just tired." She smiled reassuringly. "Don't worry." Michael looked up. Emily waved her fork casually. "Ryan's just a friend." Michael nodded. "I figured." And at that moment, he truly believed it. But sometimes, the most dangerous lies are the ones that sound completely harmless. And neither of them realized yet that a single sentence had just begun the slow destruction of their marriage. At first, the changes were so small that Michael Carter almost convinced himself they didn't exist. Life, after all, had a way of shifting slowly. Work schedules changed, people grew tired, marriage evolved. These were normal things every couple experienced eventually. But normal changes rarely arrive with locked phone screens, or with smiles that disappeared the moment someone entered the room. It started with the messages. Late at night, long after the house had fallen quiet, Michael would hear the faint vibration of Emily's phone on the nightstand. Zzz. Emily would reach for it quickly. Sometimes she would turn slightly away, the dim blue light of the screen illuminating her face. Michael would pretend to stay asleep. He would hear the soft tapping of her thumbs on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. Then silence. Then another vibration. At first, he assumed it was work. Emily's freelance marketing projects often involved clients in different time zones. But one night, curiosity crept into his voice before he could stop it. Busy client? Emily jumped slightly. Her phone screen went dark instantly. Oh, sorry, did I wake you? Michael rubbed his eyes. Just a little. She set the phone down. Just Ryan. The name again. Michael stared at the ceiling for a moment. Late for business talk. Emily gave a small laugh. He works weird hours. Michael didn't push further, but sleep came slower that night. The second change was Emily's schedule. Freelance work had always been unpredictable, but lately her calendar seemed almost chaotic. I've got a meeting tonight, she said one evening while grabbing her coat. Michael looked up from his laptop. It's 7. Marketing clients don't sleep. Where? Downtown. With Ryan? Emily paused for half a second. Then she shrugged. Yeah, he's introducing me to someone. Michael nodded. Okay. She studied his expression carefully. You're okay with that, right? Michael forced a small smile. Why wouldn't I be? Emily walked over and kissed him quickly on the cheek. Because some husbands get weird about male coworkers. Michael chuckled. I'm not some husband. Emily smiled. Good. Then she left. The house felt strangely larger after the door closed. Michael opened his laptop again but found himself staring at the same line of code for nearly 10 minutes. He finally sighed and shut the computer. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Seattle nights always felt reflective, like the city itself was thinking. Michael wondered when the evenings had stopped belonging to both of them. Another week passed. Then another. The name Ryan surfaced more often in casual conversation. Ryan thinks this campaign might go national. Ryan recommended a lighting studio in Capitol Hill. Ryan said photographers in LA are doing something similar. Michael noticed the pattern long before he mentioned it. One night during dinner, he finally said casually, You talk about him a lot. Emily looked up from her salad. Who? Ryan. She shrugged. We're working together. Michael nodded slowly. Sounds like more than that. Emily raised an eyebrow. What does that mean? Michael immediately regretted the sentence. Nothing, just noticing. Emily leaned back in her chair. You sound suspicious. I'm not. Yes, you are. Michael sighed. I just said you mention him a lot. Emily's voice sharpened slightly. That's because we're collaborating. I didn't say you weren't. She crossed her arms. Michael, he's helping me grow my business. I understand, but you're acting like something's wrong. Michael hesitated. The truth was, he didn't know what was wrong, only that something felt different. A few nights later, Michael experienced the first moment that truly unsettled him. Emily had fallen asleep on the couch with her phone in her hand. The screen lit up suddenly. A message notification appeared. Michael hadn't intended to look, but the preview text caught his eye before he could turn away. Ryan, I wish tonight didn't have to end so soon. Michael's chest tightened. He stared at the glowing screen. Emily stirred slightly beside him. He quickly looked away. The phone darkened again. For a long moment, Michael sat perfectly still. His mind raced through explanations. Maybe they were late. Maybe they were talking about a project. Maybe it meant nothing. When Emily woke up a few minutes later, she noticed him watching TV silently. What time is it? She mumbled. Almost midnight. She stretched. I should go to bed. Michael nodded. Your phone lit up earlier. Emily paused. Oh? Ryan texted. Her expression remained neutral. Probably about tomorrow's shoot. Michael hesitated. Then he asked quietly, What's going on between you two? Emily's head snapped up. What? You seem close. She stared at him as if the question itself was offensive. Then she shook her head with a soft laugh. Michael, seriously? I'm just asking. She picked up her phone. You're overthinking this. Michael watched her face carefully. Emily met his eyes. Her voice softened, almost reassuring. He's just a friend. Again, the same sentence, the same calm tone. Michael forced himself to nod. Right. Emily kissed his forehead lightly. Good night. She walked upstairs. Michael remained on the couch long after the television turned off automatically. The house had never felt so quiet. He replayed the message in his mind. I wish tonight didn't have to end so soon. The words themselves weren't proof of anything, not really, but something inside him had shifted. Trust, once effortless, now required effort, and once doubt enters a marriage, it rarely leaves quietly. Upstairs, Emily lay awake staring at the ceiling. Her phone vibrated again. Ryan, did you get home safe? She hesitated, then typed a reply. Yes. 3 dots appeared instantly. Ryan, I keep thinking about what you said tonight. Emily's heart beat a little faster. She stared at the screen. Downstairs, Michael finally turned off the lights. Neither of them slept easily that night. Because sometimes, marriages don't break from one enormous mistake. Sometimes they begin breaking with small changes. Quiet ones. The kind no one wants to see. The first thing Michael Carter realized about suspicion was that it changed the way you saw everything. Not dramatically. Not like a thunderclap or a sudden revelation. It changed things quietly, like a crack forming beneath the surface of glass. Invisible at first, then spreading slowly until the entire structure felt fragile. For weeks after the late-night message, Michael tried to convince himself nothing had changed. But once doubt entered his mind, details began to multiply. Emily smiled at her phone more often. Not the polite smile she gave clients or friends. This one was softer, private. Michael noticed it one evening while she stood by the kitchen window texting. The fading orange light of sunset filtered through the glass, illuminating her face. She looked younger somehow, almost like the version of Emily he had first fallen in love with. Then she noticed him watching. The smile vanished instantly. "What?" she asked lightly. "Nothing," Michael said. She locked the screen. "Just a client." Michael nodded. But something about the quick movement, the instinctive hiding, made his stomach tighten. Another change appeared in their weekends. Saturdays used to belong to both of them. Coffee runs, farmers markets, occasional hikes along Lake Washington. But lately, Emily had begun canceling plans. "I forgot I promised Ryan I'd help with a shoot tomorrow. Ryan needs marketing input for a gallery pitch. Ryan asked if I could review some promotional materials." Ryan, Ryan, Ryan. The name had begun to echo through their life like background noise Michael could no longer ignore. One Saturday morning, Michael stood in the doorway, watching Emily get ready. She was wearing a black jacket he hadn't seen in months. "You're dressed up for a shoot," he said. Emily glanced in the mirror. "It's an important client. Where is it?" "Just a studio downtown." "What time will you be back?" She hesitated. "Late afternoon." Michael nodded. "Okay." Emily grabbed her bag. Then she walked over and kissed him quickly. "Don't wait up for dinner." Michael watched the door close. The silence afterward felt heavy. He tried working on a new software project that morning, but concentration kept slipping away. Instead, his mind replayed small memories. Emily laughing at messages, Emily turning her phone away, Emily leaving earlier and coming home later. Michael rubbed his face. "You're imagining things." He had always believed trust was the backbone of a marriage. Without it, everything else collapsed. But trust was beginning to feel fragile. Later that afternoon, Michael made coffee and sat on the couch, scrolling absent-mindedly through his phone. He rarely used social media, but boredom made him open Instagram. He scrolled past photos of coworkers, vacation pictures, food posts. Then he froze. A photo appeared from an account he vaguely recognized. Ryan Blake Photography. Michael had followed him weeks earlier out of casual curiosity. The photo showed a modern rooftop bar, city skyline behind it, Seattle's Space Needle visible in the distance. But it wasn't the skyline that made Michael stop breathing. It was the caption. "Great meeting today. Creative minds make the best collaborations." And in the corner of the photo, barely noticeable, was a reflection in a glass window. Two figures sitting at a small table. One of them had long brown hair, wearing a black jacket. The same black jacket Emily had worn that morning. Michael stared at the image. His pulse quickened. He zoomed in. The reflection wasn't clear, but it didn't need to be, because the location tag beneath the photo said Altitude Sky Lounge, downtown Seattle. Michael looked at the time of the post, 2:11 p.m. He checked the message Emily had sent him earlier. Emily, still at the studio, long shoot. Michael sat perfectly still. The quiet living room suddenly felt unfamiliar, like a place that belonged to someone else. For nearly 10 minutes he stared at the screen. His mind searched desperately for explanations. Maybe the studio was nearby. Maybe they met briefly. Maybe the reflection wasn't even Emily. But another thought crept in, a darker one. What if she lied? Michael locked his phone and leaned back slowly. The ceiling above him looked exactly the same as it had that morning. But something fundamental had shifted. Because once you begin questioning reality, everything feels uncertain. Emily returned home around 7 that evening. Michael was sitting at the dining table. The lights were dim. She looked tired. "Long day," she said, dropping her bag. Michael watched her carefully. "How was the shoot?" "Exhausting," she sighed. "Studio lighting problems." Michael nodded slowly. "Where was the studio again?" Emily paused slightly. "Capitol Hill." Michael's chest tightened. He forced himself to remain calm. "That's funny." Emily looked up. "Why?" Michael slid his phone across the table. The Instagram photo glowed softly on the screen. Emily's eyes moved over it. For a split second, barely noticeable, her expression changed. Then she exhaled slowly. "Oh." Michael's voice was quiet. You said you were at a studio. Emily crossed her arms. We stopped for drinks afterward. Michael leaned forward. At 2 in the afternoon? It was a meeting. With Ryan. Yes. Michael studied her face. Why didn't you just say that? Emily's expression hardened slightly. Because I didn't think I needed to explain every minute of my day. That's not what I'm asking. What are you asking then? Michael struggled to articulate the feeling forming inside him. I'm asking why you told me something different. Emily's voice sharpened. You're making this bigger than it is. Am I? She looked directly into his eyes. Her voice softened, almost rehearsed. Michael, she sighed, then said the same words again. The sentence that was beginning to haunt him. Ryan is just a friend. Michael nodded slowly. But this time, he didn't fully believe it. That night, long after Emily fell asleep, Michael stood alone in the dark kitchen. Rain fell softly outside, Seattle's familiar rhythm, but inside him something had fractured. Not a complete break, not yet, just the first crack, the kind that spreads quietly through glass until one day, everything shatters. For several days after the Instagram incident, Michael Carter tried something he had never consciously attempted before in his marriage. He tried not to notice things. It was harder than he expected. Once the mind began looking for patterns, it refused to stop. Every movement, every word, every silence suddenly felt like evidence. And Michael hated that feeling. Because suspicion didn't just poison trust, it poisoned peace. Monday evening arrived with the quiet exhaustion of another workday. Michael sat at the kitchen counter answering emails from a stubborn client bug that refused to disappear from his company's software. His laptop screen glowed in the dim room while rain tapped steadily against the windows. Emily walked in around 6. She looked energized, not tired, not stressed, energized. It was a subtle difference, but Michael noticed it immediately. Hey, she said cheerfully, placing her purse on the counter. Hey. She opened the fridge and pulled out sparkling water. How was work? Normal. Emily leaned against the counter, sipping. I had lunch with Ryan today. Michael paused. Not long. Just enough for the name to settle in the air. Oh? Yeah, we were brainstorming a campaign concept. Michael nodded slowly. Sounds productive. Emily watched him carefully. You're doing that thing again. What thing? That quiet judging thing. Michael frowned. I'm not judging. You are. He closed his laptop. Emily, I didn't say anything. That's the problem. Michael blinked. What does that even mean? Emily sighed. You get this look like I've done something wrong. Michael leaned back in his chair. Maybe because you told me you were in a studio last weekend when you weren't. Emily's expression tightened instantly. We talked about that. Did we? Yes, you said it wasn't important. Because it wasn't. Michael rubbed his forehead slowly. I just don't understand why you didn't tell me. Emily's voice sharpened. Because I didn't think I needed permission to grab a drink with a coworker. Michael's patience began thinning. I never said you needed permission, but you're acting like I do. That's not fair. Emily laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. Michael, you're acting insecure. The word landed harder than he expected. Insecure? Yes. She crossed her arms. You've never cared about my work friends before. Michael's voice remained calm, but his chest felt tight. I've never heard about one of them every single day before. Emily rolled her eyes. That's because you're suddenly paying attention. Maybe because something feels different. She stared at him for a long moment. Then she shook her head slowly. This is exactly what I was afraid of. What? You turning into the jealous husband. Michael felt something inside him snap slightly. I'm not jealous. You're interrogating me. I asked 2 questions. You're counting where I go and who I see. Michael stood up from the chair. That's not true. Emily grabbed her phone from the counter. I have to leave. Leave? I'm meeting Ryan. Michael stared at her. Right now? Yes. It's 8, she shrugged. He wants to discuss a photography exhibit. Michael let out a slow breath. Of course he does. Emily's eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. No, say it. Michael hesitated, then finally said quietly, You spend more time with him than with me lately. Silence filled the kitchen. Emily looked genuinely irritated now. This is exactly what I mean. What do you mean? You're trying to make me feel guilty for doing my job. I'm not. Yes, you are. Michael shook his head slowly. I just miss my wife. The words hung in the air longer than either of them expected. For a moment, Emily's expression softened, but the moment passed quickly. You're being dramatic, she said quietly. Michael felt something sink inside his chest. Later that night, Michael sat alone in the living room again. The television played quietly in the background, but he wasn't watching it. His phone buzzed with a message from Emily. Emily, don't wait up, it might be late. Michael stared at the message, then typed a reply. Michael, okay. He placed the phone on the table and waited. Across the city, Emily sat at a dimly lit bar beside Ryan Blake. Ryan leaned back casually in his chair, his camera bag resting near his feet. "You seem distracted tonight," he said. Emily sighed. "Michael's being weird." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Weird how?" "He thinks something's going on between us." Ryan smiled slightly. "Well, is something going on?" Emily gave him a warning look. "Don't start. I'm serious." She stirred the ice in her glass. "He's acting like I'm cheating." Ryan studied her face carefully. "Are you?" Emily didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked out the window at the wet Seattle streets. The city lights reflected across the pavement like scattered stars. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. Ryan leaned forward. "What do you mean you don't know?" Emily looked back at him. Her voice softened. "I mean, nothing has happened." Ryan's lips curved faintly. "Yet." Emily's heart beat slightly faster. "You're not helping." Ryan chuckled. "Emily, let's be honest." He lowered his voice. "You and I crossed that line weeks ago." Her breath caught. "What line?" Ryan held her gaze. "The one where it stops being just friendship." Emily looked away quickly, because deep down, she knew he wasn't wrong. At home, Michael checked the clock. 11:40 p.m. The house felt colder than usual. He stood near the kitchen window, watching rain slide slowly down the glass. His reflection stared back at him, tired, older, uncertain. He remembered something his father had once told him about marriage. The most dangerous moment isn't when someone cheats, it's when they stop feeling guilty about it. Michael didn't know why the thought suddenly returned now, but something inside him whispered a quiet truth he didn't want to accept. Somewhere in the space between honesty and secrecy, between loyalty and temptation, between explanation and silence, Emily had crossed an invisible line. And once someone crosses it, coming back becomes much harder than anyone expects. There are moments in life when the truth doesn't arrive with noise. No shouting, no dramatic confessions, just a quiet discovery small enough to fit inside the palm of your hand, yet powerful enough to change everything you thought you knew. For Michael Carter, that moment came on an ordinary Thursday night. Rain had been falling over Seattle for hours. The city looked blurred through the windows, streetlights stretching into glowing streaks across the wet pavement. Inside the house, the soft hum of the dishwasher filled the kitchen. Emily was upstairs taking a shower. Michael sat on the couch, reviewing a document on his laptop, when he heard the faint vibration of a phone on the coffee table. Bzzz. He looked down. Emily had left her phone there. That wasn't unusual. But the screen lit up again. Bzzz. Michael glanced at it instinctively. A notification appeared. Ryan Blake. Michael's chest tightened slightly. He wasn't trying to snoop. He truly wasn't. But the preview text appeared before he could look away. "Ryan, I keep thinking about what you said yesterday." Michael froze. The room suddenly felt smaller. Another message appeared seconds later. "Ryan, I wish things were simpler." Michael stared at the screen. His pulse began to rise slowly. The shower upstairs was still running, water rushing through the pipes. He could hear Emily moving around faintly. The phone vibrated again. Another message. "Ryan, seeing you tonight made it harder to pretend this is just friendship." Michael's breath caught. He stared at the words. For a long moment he didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. Because suddenly something inside him whispered the thing he had been trying to ignore for weeks. This isn't normal. Michael picked up the phone slowly. His hands felt strangely cold. The screen was still open to the messages. More text scrolled upward in the conversation. "Ryan, you look beautiful tonight." "Emily, you're impossible." "Ryan, you smiled though." "Emily, I shouldn't." "Ryan, then why do you?" Michael's chest tightened further. He kept reading. The messages stretched back weeks. Nothing explicit, nothing undeniable, but the tone was unmistakable. Playful, intimate, dangerously personal. "Ryan, Michael doesn't notice how incredible you are." "Emily, that's not fair." "Ryan, then why do you talk to me about everything instead of him?" A pause in the messages, then Emily's reply. "Because you listen." Michael closed his eyes briefly. The sentence felt heavier than any confession. Upstairs, the shower turned off. Michael quickly placed the phone back on the table exactly where it had been. His heart was beating harder now. He sat back down on the couch and stared at his laptop screen. But the words blurred together. Emily's footsteps moved across the bedroom floor, then down the hallway, then down the stairs. She walked into the living room wearing soft gray sweatpants and a loose sweater, drying her hair with a towel. "Did my phone buzz earlier?" she asked casually. Michael looked up. His voice sounded calm. "Yes." Emily picked it up and checked the screen. Her eyes flickered briefly as she read the notifications. Then she locked the phone. "Just Ryan," she said. Michael felt something twist inside his chest. The sentence again. "Just Ryan. Just a friend." He watched her carefully. "Seems like you two talk a lot." Emily shrugged. We're working together. Michael nodded slowly, but now the words felt hollow, because he had seen the truth between the lines. Later that night, they lay in bed together. Emily fell asleep quickly, her breathing steady beside him, but Michael stared at the ceiling in the dark. The rain had stopped. Seattle was quiet again. His mind replayed the messages again and again. You looked beautiful tonight. I keep thinking about you. Seeing you made it harder to pretend this is just friendship. Michael had expected something different if he ever discovered betrayal. He had imagined anger, rage, explosive confrontation. But instead he felt something far worse. A slow, sinking realization. Because the messages revealed something deeper than physical cheating. They revealed emotional intimacy. And emotional intimacy often came first. Michael remembered the early years of their marriage. Back when Emily had been the person he told everything to. Work frustrations, family problems, random thoughts about life. She used to listen the same way Ryan did now. Attentively, genuinely. When had that stopped? Had he changed? Had she? Or had the distance between them simply grown quietly over time until someone else stepped into the space that remained? Michael didn't know. But one truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Betrayal rarely begins in a bedroom. It begins in conversations, private ones, personal ones. The kind that slowly replaced the emotional connection that once belonged to a marriage. Beside him, Emily turned slightly in her sleep. Her hand brushed lightly against his arm. The gesture used to comfort him. Tonight it felt unfamiliar, almost distant. Michael stared into the darkness. For weeks he had been asking himself a question. Is something happening between them? Tonight, that question had changed. Now the question was far more frightening. How long has it been happening? Because sometimes the most painful discovery isn't realizing your partner might cheat. It's realizing they may have already left you emotionally long before the physical betrayal ever begins. Downstairs, Emily's phone lit up once more on the nightstand. Ryan had sent another message. Ryan, I wish you were here right now. The screen slowly faded back to black. And upstairs, in the dark bedroom, Michael Carter finally understood something heartbreaking. The destruction of his marriage had not begun tonight. It had begun the moment his wife started sharing pieces of her heart with someone else. The confrontation did not happen immediately. For 2 days after discovering the messages, Michael Carter said nothing. He went to work, answered emails, sat through meetings, came home at the same hour as always. From the outside, nothing had changed. But inside him, something had shifted permanently. Once a person sees the truth, even a partial one, it becomes impossible to return to ignorance. And Michael now carried the quiet weight of knowledge. Emily noticed the change before he spoke about it. On Saturday morning, the kitchen was filled with the smell of coffee and toasted bread. Emily sat at the table, scrolling through her phone, while Michael poured coffee into 2 mugs. The silence between them felt different, heavier. Emily glanced up. You're quiet lately. Michael placed her mug in front of her. Just thinking. About work? About us. Emily set her phone down slowly. What does that mean? Michael sat across from her. For a moment he studied her face. The familiar lines, the soft curve of her smile that had once been the center of his world. Then he asked quietly, How long? Emily frowned. How long what? How long have you been talking to him like that? The question hung in the air like a sudden crack in glass. Emily's eyes sharpened. What are you talking about? Michael leaned back slightly. I saw the messages. Silence. Emily's face drained of color for a split second. Then she recovered quickly. You went through my phone? Michael shook his head. No. You invaded my privacy, Emily. Her voice grew defensive immediately. That's not okay. Michael felt frustration rising. Stop. Stop what? Turning this into something else. Emily crossed her arms. You're accusing me of something based on a few messages. Michael stared at her in disbelief. A few messages? They were conversations. They were emotional. Emily rolled her eyes. Oh my God. Michael's patience snapped slightly. You told him he listens to you better than I do. Emily looked away. That's not what I meant. You told him you shouldn't smile when he compliments you. You're twisting things. Am I? Emily pushed her chair back slightly. Michael, nothing happened. He leaned forward. Yet. Her jaw tightened. That's not fair. Michael's voice lowered. Then explain it. Emily hesitated. For the first time since the conversation began, uncertainty crossed her face. It just happened. Michael blinked slowly. What does that mean? Emily rubbed her forehead. We started talking about work. And he understands my creative side. Michael stared at her. I've known you for 10 years. You're not a creative person. The words landed harder than she intended. Emily realized it immediately. Michael's expression changed, slightly, subtly, but enough. I see. That's not what I meant. Yes, it is, she sighed. Michael, I just mean we connect differently. Michael's voice was quiet now. You connect emotionally. Emily didn't answer, and that silence said more than any confession. Michael stood up and walked to the window. Outside, grey clouds stretched across the Seattle sky. You taught him things you used to tell me. Emily's voice softened. I didn't mean for it to happen. Michael turned. You didn't mean to fall for him? Emily's eyes widened. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. She stood up too. Nothing physical happened. Michael laughed once, a hollow sound. That's supposed to make it better? It should. Why? Because it means I didn't cheat. Michael shook his head slowly. You already did. Emily stared at him. No. Yes, that's not cheating. Michael met her eyes. You gave him the part of you that used to belong to this marriage. The words hung in the air. Emily looked genuinely shaken. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, she whispered. It went too far. Michael studied her carefully. What did? The emotional stuff. When? Emily looked down at the floor. I don't know. Michael exhaled slowly. That's the problem. What problem? You don't know when the line was crossed. Emily's voice trembled slightly. It just happened over time. Michael closed his eyes briefly, and suddenly he understood something painful. Most betrayals didn't begin with a decision. They began with small permissions. One late conversation, one personal confession, one moment of feeling understood, then another, and another, until suddenly the line behind you disappears. Emily looked at him again, her voice almost pleading. It wasn't supposed to become this. Michael asked quietly, What is it? She hesitated. I don't know. That answer hurt more than anything else, because uncertainty meant the story wasn't over. Michael walked back to the table. Are you in love with him? Emily's breath caught. She couldn't finish the sentence. Michael noticed, and that silence told him everything he needed to know. The kitchen felt unbearably quiet now. Finally, Emily whispered, I didn't plan this. Michael nodded slowly. I believe you. She looked up hopefully. But that doesn't change what it is. Emily's eyes filled with frustration. You're acting like our marriage is already over. Michael stared at her. I don't know if it is. The honesty in his voice frightened them both. Emily grabbed her phone from the table. I need some air. Michael didn't stop her. The front door closed softly a moment later. Michael remained in the kitchen, standing alone, listening to the quiet house around him. For the first time since their marriage began, he truly didn't know if it would survive. Because sometimes, destruction doesn't come from one enormous mistake. Sometimes it grows slowly from something that once seemed harmless. A conversation, a friendship, a connection that quietly evolves into something dangerous. And by the time you realize what it has become, the damage may already be irreversible. There is a moment in every failing marriage when the private damage finally becomes visible to the outside world. Until that moment, everything can still pretend to be normal. Smiles at dinner, polite conversations with friends, hands occasionally touching in public as if nothing has changed. But the truth has a way of surfacing, and once it does, the illusion collapses quickly. For Michael Carter and Emily Carter, that moment arrived on an ordinary Friday night. The invitation came from Clara Jennings, Emily's closest friend since college. Clara was hosting a small dinner at her apartment overlooking Elliott Bay. It was the kind of casual gathering their group had attended dozens of times over the years. Wine, music, conversations about work and life. Emily insisted they go. We can't just stay home forever, she said while getting ready. Michael stood near the bedroom doorway watching her. The last few weeks had changed something fundamental between them. They spoke less, touched less. Even the space between their bodies felt wider. But Emily still wore her wedding ring, and Michael still wore his. From the outside, they looked like the same couple they had always been. Are you coming? Emily asked. Michael nodded slowly. Yeah. Clara's apartment was filled with warm light and the soft sound of jazz music. Their friends greeted them with familiar hugs and easy conversation. For a while, everything seemed almost normal. Michael stood near the kitchen talking with Danielle Park, an old friend from work. Emily left across the room with Clara and two other women. If someone had walked into the apartment at that moment, they would have seen nothing unusual. But people who know you well can sense tension long before it becomes visible. Clara noticed first. She watched Emily carefully for a few minutes before pulling her aside near the balcony. You okay? Clara asked quietly. Emily blinked. Of course. You and Michael feel Different. Emily forced a small smile. Just stress. Clara studied her. You're a terrible liar. Emily laughed, but the sound felt strained. It's nothing serious. Clara raised an eyebrow, but didn't push further. Yet. Across the room, Daniel handed Michael a beer. You look like you haven't slept in weeks, Daniel said. Michael gave a tired smile. Feels like it. Daniel lowered his voice slightly. Everything okay at home? Michael hesitated. For a moment, he considered pretending everything was fine, but the truth was sitting in his chest like a stone. We're having problems, he admitted quietly. Daniel nodded slowly. That bad? Michael looked across the room. Emily was laughing at something Clara had said, but when their eyes briefly met, she looked away almost immediately. Yes, Michael said softly. That bad. Dinner was served shortly after. The group gathered around a long wooden table near the windows overlooking the dark water of the bay. Conversation flowed easily at first. Work stories, travel plans, the usual comfortable topics friends share. But tension has a way of leaking into even the most ordinary moments. Emily checked her phone twice during dinner. Michael noticed. So did Clara. Busy tonight? Clara asked casually. Emily set the phone down quickly. Just work. Michael didn't say anything, but something in his expression made Clara glance between them. The tension was becoming visible now. Then came the moment neither of them could control. Clara reached for her phone to show the group a new photography exhibit she had discovered online. You guys have to see this, she said, turning the screen toward the table. Some local photographer is getting a lot of attention right now. She scrolled through a few images, then stopped. Oh. Michael looked up. Emily froze. Clara turned the screen slightly toward them. On the display was a photo from the opening night of the exhibit. The photographer stood in the center of the frame, Ryan Blake, and beside him, Emily. Not standing across the room, not casually in the background, standing close beside him. His hand resting comfortably against her back. The kind of casual intimacy that rarely exists between just friends. The table went quiet. One of the guests shifted uncomfortably in their chair. Clara looked confused. Emily, weren't you working that night? Emily's voice felt tight. It was a client event. Michael stared at the image. Something strange happened inside him. He expected anger, rage, but instead he felt clarity. Because the truth was no longer hidden. Everyone could see it now. The drive home was silent. Rain streaked softly across the windshield as Michael guided the car through quiet Seattle streets. Emily stared out the passenger window. Neither of them spoke until they reached the house. When the front door closed behind them, the silence finally broke. Michael, he shook his head gently. You don't have to explain. Emily's voice trembled slightly. It's not what you think. Michael turned to face her. Then what is it? She struggled for words. It's complicated. Michael let out a soft breath. No, he paused. It isn't. Emily's frustration surfaced. You're making this bigger than it is. Michael looked at her for a long moment, then asked the question he had been avoiding for weeks. Do you love him? Emily's breath caught. Her silence lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough. Michael nodded slowly, and something inside him settled, the final piece of truth falling into place. He walked past her toward the living room. Emily followed. So that's it? She asked. You're just giving up? Michael stopped. For years he had believed marriage meant fighting through everything, but now he understood something different. Sometimes fighting only prolongs something that has already ended. I've been fighting for weeks, he said quietly. Emily's eyes filled with frustration. Nothing even happened. Michael looked back at her. Yes, he said softly. It did. She shook her head. You're overreacting. Michael's voice remained calm. No, he paused. I'm finally accepting reality. That night, they slept in separate rooms. The house felt unfamiliar, like a place that no longer belonged to either of them. Because sometimes the collapse of a marriage doesn't happen during an explosive argument. Sometimes it happens in the quiet moment when both people realize the life they built together no longer exists. And once that realization arrives, there is no way to rebuild the illusion. 6 months later, Seattle looked almost the same. The rain still drifted across the city in quiet gray sheets. Morning traffic still crawled slowly across the bridges. Coffee shops still filled with the low hum of conversations and laptop keyboards. From the outside, life continued exactly as it always had. But for Michael Carter and Emily Carter, everything had changed. Michael now lived in a small apartment overlooking Lake Union. It wasn't large, a simple living room, a quiet bedroom, a small balcony where he could watch the water in the evenings. When he first moved in, the emptiness felt overwhelming. 10 years of shared life had disappeared almost overnight. Half the furniture had been sold, photographs had been packed into boxes. The house they once shared was no longer his home. At first, the silence felt unbearable. There were nights when he would wake up instinctively reaching across the bed expecting Emily to be there. But slowly, something unexpected happened. The silence became peaceful. Not joyful, not exciting, just peaceful. And sometimes peace is the first step toward healing. The divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier. It wasn't dramatic, no shouting in courtrooms, no bitter accusations. Just 2 signatures on legal documents. 2 people acknowledging that the life they built together no longer existed. Michael had expected to feel anger. Instead, what remained was something quieter. Sadness. But also acceptance. Because the truth had become impossible to ignore. The marriage hadn't ended in a single moment. It had ended slowly, long before the final conversation. Across the city, Emily's life had changed in ways she hadn't expected. Her relationship with Ryan Blake had continued after the separation. At first, everything felt intense and exciting. Late-night conversations, creative collaboration, the intoxicating feeling of being seen and understood. Ryan made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. For a while, she believed she had made the right choice. But excitement has a strange habit. It fades. The first cracks appeared quietly. Ryan's work kept him traveling frequently. Photo shoots in Los Angeles, gallery events in Portland, creative retreats in Vancouver. Weeks would pass with only brief messages between them. When they did see each other, their conversations revolved around photography, projects, and industry connections. It was stimulating, but something was missing. Emily noticed it one evening while sitting alone in Ryan's apartment. The room was filled with framed photographs and scattered camera equipment. Ryan was editing images on his computer. Neither of them had spoken for nearly 20 minutes. Emily suddenly realized something strange. Ryan knew her ambitions. He understood her creative frustrations, but he didn't know her history. He didn't know the stories about her childhood, or the quiet habits she had developed during 10 years of marriage. Those parts of her life belonged to someone else. And suddenly, she understood something painful. Ryan had never replaced Michael. He had simply filled the empty space that had appeared between them. One afternoon, Emily sat alone at a cafe near Pike Place Market. Outside the window, tourists walked through the crowded street carrying umbrellas and shopping bags. Couples laughed together, shared coffee, talked about their day. Emily stirred that drink slowly. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. Years earlier, Michael had once told her something during a quiet Sunday morning. She hadn't understood it then, but now the words returned with painful clarity. Love isn't just the exciting parts, he had said. It's the ordinary days you survive together. At the time, she had thought it sounded boring. Now, she realized it had been wisdom. Excitement fades, passion fluctuates, but loyalty, the quiet, steady kind, is what builds a life. And she had traded that life for something temporary. Meanwhile, Michael walked along a trail near the lake behind his apartment. Spring had begun to arrive in Seattle. Cherry blossoms bloomed along the sidewalks. The air carried the faint scent of rain and fresh leaves. For the first time in months, he felt something unfamiliar. Not happiness, not exactly, but freedom. For weeks after the separation, he had replayed every moment of their marriage in his mind, asking the same questions. What went wrong? What could he have done differently? But eventually he realized something important. Not every ending has a clear explanation. Sometimes people simply change. Sometimes the connection that once held 2 lives together slowly disappears. And sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is accept that reality. One evening, while walking home, Michael received a message. His phone buzzed softly in his pocket. He checked the screen. It was from Emily. Emily, I hope you're doing okay. Michael stopped walking. For a moment he stared at the message. 6 months earlier, that message would have stirred 1,000 emotions. Anger, longing, hope. Now it felt different, calmer. He placed the phone back in his pocket without replying. Not because he hated her, not because he wanted revenge, but because some chapters of life simply end, and reopening them doesn't change the past. The sun was setting behind Seattle's skyline as Michael reached the lakefront. Golden light reflected across the water. People walked dogs along the trail. A young couple sat on a bench talking quietly. Michael watched the scene for a moment, then continued walking. For years he had believed losing his marriage would mean losing everything. But now he understood something surprising. The end of one life sometimes becomes the beginning of another. And healing doesn't always come from fixing what was broken. Sometimes it comes from letting go of the life you once fought so hard to protect. Then slowly learning how to build a new one.